Welcome to our deep dive into the world of Linux.
The penguin.
Yeah, the penguin.
Yeah.
We're going to go way beyond the mascot, though.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to see how this operating system went from a student's side project to a force shaping the internet. We've got all the research and notes here, so we're ready to extract those golden nuggets.
It really is a wild ride when you think about how much of our digital world runs on this system that started, well, with just one person wanting something different.
Yeah.
Let's rewind to the early 90s.
Okay.
You've got Windows 3.0. You know, it's gaining some traction.
Right.
But it's a closed system.
Yeah.
You've got UNIX. It's powerful, but man, it's expensive.
Yeah.
So there's a real gap, a real need for an alternative.
And that's where Linus Torvalds comes in.
Exactly.
I mean, he's just a computer science student in 1991.
Yeah.
And he decides, you know what? I'm going to build my own operating system kernel.
I mean, the audacity.
It's incredible.
Right.
He wasn't even trying to create just another OS.
No.
This was much more radical. He wanted it to be open source.
Now, to really grasp the impact of Linux, we've got to go back and understand how revolutionary open source was at that time.
Yeah.
This is about the source code, the DNA of the software, free to use, modify, and distribute. Imagine challenging, the norms of an entire industry.
Right.
Especially one dominated by giants like Microsoft.
Yeah, it's a true David versus Goliath story. This little scrappy newcomer, Linux, comes in with a totally different philosophy. Did people see it as a serious threat to Microsoft back then, or was it more of an underground thing at first?
Well, in those early days, Linux.
Yeah.
Not exactly user-friendly.
Right.
You really had to be pretty tech-savvy to get it up and running.
Yeah.
I mean, think about downloading Slackware Linux, burning it onto a CD, then turning to, those early online forums for help. This was not something you could just pop down to the computer store and pick up.
That reminds me of the story you were telling me about getting Linux running on your old 486.
Ugh.
It sounded more like an adventure than just installing software.
It really was. And that whole hands-on DIY spirit, that was a huge part of Linux's appeal. It drew this community of programmers, hobbyists, tech enthusiasts, all drawn to that collaborative development model. You had these user groups popping up all over the place. People were sharing tips. They were sharing code. There was just this incredible sense of shared learning and problem solving.
So it wasn't just the software itself.
No.
It was that whole ecosystem growing around it.
Oh, yeah.
So it was almost like a social movement, as much as a technological one.
I love that, yeah. That community-driven approach, key to Linux's success. This wasn't just one person working in isolation. This is thousands of people all over the world contributing their time and expertise.
That collaborative spirit really sets open source apart. But was this openness seen as a strength or a weakness back then?
Mm-hmm.
Did people doubt if something free could really compete with commercial software?
That's a great question. It leads to one of the most common misconceptions about open source. Free does not mean low quality.
Okay.
In fact, a lot of people argued that the collaborative development, it actually led to more robust and secure software.
Right.
Because the code is open.
Right.
Anyone can inspect it, find bugs, and contribute improvements.
Yeah, it's like having thousands of eyes just constantly checking for errors.
Exactly.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it seems like that approach really started to gain traction, especially as Linux started to spread, beyond those early adopters.
Absolutely. And as Linux matured, it started to attract the attention of larger companies. They started to see the potential of a powerful, reliable, and cost-effective operating system. And that, my friend, is where things really start to take off.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting. We've got this community-driven operating system making its mark. Where do we go from here? What are the key turning points that propel Linux into the mainstream?
Well, one of the most significant developments, I think, was the emergence of Linux distributions. These were essentially pre-packaged bundles of Linux, right? Along with other software, desktop environments, system utilities, applications, all of that. This made it much easier for people to install and use.
So you didn't have to be a command line wizard anymore to get Linux up and running.
Exactly.
That must have been huge for accessibility.
It was a game changer.
Yeah.
Distributions like Red Hat and Debian,
Yeah.
they played a massive role in bringing Linux to a wider audience. But to really understand the scale of Linux's impact, we need to look beyond individual users.
Right. You're right. This isn't just running on some desktops in bedrooms anymore.
Nope.
This is going big. I can't wait to dive into that part of the story.
Linux is about to hit the big time.
That's right. We're talking about Linux going mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
So these tech giants IBM, Google, they start seeing its potential. And they weren't just using it for internal projects.
Oh, no, this was way bigger. They were building crucial parts of their infrastructure on Linux.
Wow, that's a massive endorsement. It really tells you something about Linux's stability and power.
Yeah.
What were they drawn to specifically? I mean, was it purely a technical thing, or were there other factors involved?
Well, there were several key advantages. First, Linux was incredibly stable and reliable. Think mission-critical systems, right? They need to run smoothly 24/7.
Right.
And Linux was becoming known for that. Second, Linux was highly customizable. Companies could tailor it to meet their specific needs, not something you could easily do with those proprietary operating systems.
That flexibility must have been a big draw, especially for companies working on the cutting edge. It's like having a toolbox instead of a pre-assembled gadget. You can build exactly what you need.
Exactly. And then the third factor, and this might have been the most appealing, was cost. Linux was free to use, distribute, and modify. This was a huge advantage over proprietary systems, which often came with hefty licensing fees.
So you've got reliable, customizable, and cost-effective. No wonder they jumped on board. But it wasn't just about saving a few bucks, was it? There was this whole philosophical alignment with the open source movement too, right?
Absolutely. Companies like IBM and Google were already starting to embrace open source principles in other areas of their business. So Linux fit perfectly into that philosophy. It wasn't just about using the software. It was about being part of that community, contributing back to the project, fostering innovation through collaboration.
So it was this win-win situation. Companies get a robust, flexible operating system, and the Linux community gains valuable contributions from some of the biggest names in tech. That synergy must have been pretty incredible to see.
It really was. And this brings us to one of the most significant impacts of Linux, its role in shaping the internet as we know it. By the late 90s, a huge chunk of the internet was running on Linux. It powered web servers, email systems, databases, countless other critical infrastructure components.
Wow, that's massive. So the websites we visit, the emails we send, all those online services we use.
All running on Linux behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's almost invisible.
It's like the plumbing of the internet. You don't always see it.
Right.
But it's essential for everything to work.
It's a great analogy. I think it's easy to take that stuff for granted. You just click and things work. But there's this whole world of technology operating behind the scenes, and Linux is playing a starring role.
And that dominance, that wasn't just a fluke. Linux was really well suited for the demands of the internet. It was designed to be scalable, it could handle massive amounts of traffic and data, and it was incredibly secure, which was crucial in those early days of the internet when security was a major concern.
So Linux was robust enough to power that emerging internet and flexible enough to evolve with it. That's a pretty powerful combination. It really makes you wonder, what would the internet look like today if Linux hadn't come along? Would we even have the same level of open access and innovation?
That's a fascinating question to consider. Hard to say for sure, but it's definitely possible that the internet would have developed very differently without Linux.
Yeah. It's a mind-boggling thought. Would we have the same online freedom and innovation if Linux hadn't stepped in? I mean, it's hard to say for sure, but Linux's impact on the internet is undeniable.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Would proprietary systems have taken over?
Yeah.
Leading to a much more, closed and controlled internet? Or maybe some other open source solution would have popped up.
Yeah.
It's all speculation at this point, but it underscores how important open source software has been to the internet as we know it.
Right. And Linux's impact, I mean, it goes way beyond just those servers and networks, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere.
It's become this driving force in so many other areas of technology. Where else has it popped up?
Well, look at the mobile revolution. I mean, you might be surprised to learn that Android, the most popular mobile operating system out there, it's built on a Linux kernel.
That's right. I mean, the phones we use every day, the apps we depend on, they all have this connection back to Linux. It's amazing how deeply embedded it is in our lives.
It really is.
Yeah.
And this highlights another reason Linux is so successful. It's adaptable. It's not just servers. It's not just desktops. It's in everything, like those tiny embedded systems in cars and appliances.
Right.
All the way up to, those massive supercomputers they use for scientific research.
So Linux is powering the tiny and the massive. I mean, it's literally everywhere. And that brings us back to that whole idea of open source. This wasn't just about making a free operating system. It was about changing how we think about developing software, sharing knowledge, collaborating, to create something way bigger than any one person could do alone.
That's it, yeah. The legacy of Linux and open source, it goes beyond just lines of code. It's about transparency, community, believing that we can achieve more together than we can by ourselves. And that message, I think, that resonates beyond the tech world, too.
It really does. It's such an inspiring story. It shows how sometimes these big revolutions, they start small. One person with passion and a willingness to share their creation. And think about all the open source projects that have flourished since Linux. They all owe something to those early pioneers who championed that idea of open access.
It's this incredible ripple effect, and it's still going today. And it's not just in tech, it's education, science, art, all sorts of fields.
Right. So next time you open up your computer, browse the web, or even use your smartphone, take a second to think about the influence of Linux and open source. They really shaped the technology we use in these profound ways.
Yeah, and remember that spirit of open source, it's all around us. It's in those collaborative projects we get involved in, the knowledge we share, without expecting anything back, that belief that we can build a better future by being open and working together.
That is a great point to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Linux. It's a story about technology, sure, but it's also a story about the human spirit, innovation, community, and the power of sharing what we know.